All right. Hello, everyone. Can you hear me okay? All right, cool. Yeah, my name is Will MacNeil, and I work for a company called The Mill. My job title is I'm an art director, but more specifically, I'm a motion graphics lead animator. So mainly I lead teams doing motion graphics projects. I'm based in our London office, but we actually have offices in 4 places: London, New York, Chicago, and LA. There seems to be some misunderstanding about how many people actually work at the mill at the moment, but it's somewhere between 800 and 1,000 people. This is our London team. A question you might ask is, what is the mill? And that's getting increasingly more difficult to answer. We are a post-production company, a visual effects company, design studio, an emerging technology company. We do a lot of engineering projects and coding projects, and also a creative agency and a production company, all rolled into one. And I think the power of a company like The Mill is the way that these departments interact. A really good example is this thing. This is called Blackbird, also known as the world's most expensive tracking marker. This is, if you haven't seen it, we make a lot of car ads, and more car ads are featuring CG cars. It's very difficult to get new cars to the locations where you want them to be, and often our clients, the car manufacturers, want to keep their new car a secret. So we designed this thing to make it a lot easier to put CG cars into commercials. And the way it works is it's a physical electric car, but it's adaptable. It can change the wheelbase, all the dimensions. You put the right wheels and the right tires on it, which means that we get exactly correct contact points when we film with the car. What else? It's electric, and the performance is completely programmable. So all the ways that a car can move, we can program into it, so whatever car we put in there, it actually behaves like with the physics of the real thing. And that's quite amazing, and it's extremely difficult to fake in post-production. The other thing it does is it captures a huge amount of data. So it's recording 360 HDRI all the time. It's got a laser scanner built in. So all of this stuff kind of gets packaged up, and our CG artists at the mill have a lot more information to work with when they start making these ads. The other thing that's quite interesting is it's not just changing the way car ads are made, it's actually changing the way cars are made, because car manufacturers are seeing this and saying, well, now I can visualize this thing before I've even made it. And it's also being used in conjunction with, we have a partnership with Unreal, and we've recently done some tests with real-time car replacement. In fact, we made a film where we, in real time, replaced the car. All this stuff's on our website if you want to check out any more of that. That's what we do every day. Sorry, no, what we don't do every day is build cars. What we do every day is make ads. This is a new reel that has just come out, so let's give you an idea of what we're all about. I'd say thank you very much, but I joined the mill in November and I didn't make a single thing in that reel. Hopefully that will change. The design department where I work is a large department. It's made up of concept artists, map painters, print designers, directors, illustrators, 2D animators, and motion designers like me doing stuff in 2D and 3D. It's a very creative department, and because of that, we're closely linked with something called Mill Plus, which is our internal creative agency. And having Mill Plus means that people who work within the mill can work as directors with our clients, and they can take a creative lead on a project right from the start, not necessarily the way a post house would normally work, where you pick up creative kind of midway through production or even after production. And all the jobs I'm going to show you for the rest of the project are actually made through Mill Plus. Oh, sorry, the rest of the presentation. Meanwhile, this is the design department reel. I'm going to show you this, and then I'm going to take you through a couple of jobs in particular. Thanks a lot. Software-wise, so motion design, we still heavily rely on Cinema 4D and After Effects for pretty much everything we do. C4D for 3D, After Effects for all our 2D and compositing. We're starting to play around a little bit more with a couple other things. Houdini is definitely starting to feature in our work, and we see it as a way of augmenting Cinema 4D. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about that today. Nuke is coming into use in our department a little bit by default. The mill is a 32-bit linear house. Every file that passes around the shop has to be 32-bit linear, which means that working with After Effects is actually becoming a bit of a problem. That said, here's a project that was made completely with Cinema 4D and After Effects as a promo for a American TV show called The Americans, and it was directed by a director in London in our studio called Grant Barry, and then animated out in Los Angeles. There you go. Yep, quick one. As I said, that was all Cinema 4D and After Effects done out in our LA studio. Now, two projects I'm going to go in quite a bit more detail about. The first one is called This Is Not a Cinema, and it is made for View, who are a cinema. So the idea with this project is showing off the fact that they show movies, but they also show all the kinds of things like sporting events. They even do TED Talks, TV shows, you name it. So this is a film we made for them to kind of highlight all that work. And we finished it about 2 weeks ago. It does take a little while to start. Okay, so this project was directed by a creative director from Mill Plus, who is actually based in our New York office. His name is Rama Allen. And then it was animated, edited, composited, and graded in London. And I led the motion design side of the team. We did a treatment for this back in September, or Rama did, and he had this idea for something he called the Wonder Maker, which is this kind of machine that sort of emits all the different content that views show in their cinema. And the idea was basically to intercut stock footage of that kind of material with some other things, some live footage of people in cinemas watching the cinema, lots of element stuff, people like hair raising off your arms, that sort of thing, and also lots and lots of cool little close-up macro motion graphics kind of objects, which we were responsible for. In order to win the job, they actually made a mood film, and I'm going to show you that now, and then I'll get a bit into how we did it. Yeah, so that was back in September. The client loved it, but we didn't actually start working this until this February. And the brief had changed a bit. They wanted to do away with pretty much everything except for the live action from the events that they were covering, and then have our 3D kind of macro motion graphics kind of stuff. But one thing they really wanted to push was this idea that there would be this kind of seamless integration between the live action footage and what we're doing, which meant, unfortunately, that we had to wait for the edit to finish before we could start work. So it's a pretty big challenge. We had to kind of start from scratch, really, with designing all these bits and pieces. We had to see what the edit was doing. And we didn't have a huge amount of time, but I think we refined the process of trying to create kind of abstract motion graphics so that it didn't become an unbearable task. And I'll try to explain what I mean by that in a minute. One thing to always bear in mind when you're doing projects like this is that you're making kind of abstract art. And, well, you can call it art if you like. And there's nothing concrete to go on. There's, you start and you could be making anything. So one thing I like to do quite early on is just get a bunch of images in front of people. So you can call them mood boards or whatever you like. And I print these out because I think it's important to actually get these kind of in front of everybody and let people touch them, let people write on them, let them, kind of keep them handy instead of just having it on a file somewhere where you have to keep going back to it. This just kind of, oh, pass me that sheet again. And the other thing we're trying to do here is create a vocabulary, because it's easy to say, oh, I want a CG car, and pretty much everyone knows what you're talking about. But then you say, I want a Wonder Maker, and you're like, well, what the hell is that? So getting stuff like this in front of people really helps kind of define the words you're using and what you're going to be doing going forward. We started properly with about 4 weeks to go, and there were 4 of us doing the CG stuff on this. I was joined with 3 other animators, Raj Davzi, James Lee, and Will Denning. And we just started with kind of experimenting. We didn't really know exactly what to do at first, so I started working on this thing that we eventually called the Surface, that's used a lot in the film. And it's meant to do a lot of different things. It's meant to kind of respond to music, respond to footage. In some cases, it's even meant to look like a landscape, a topography, and it's meant to move in very interesting ways. So when you start building something like this, it's a little bit terrifying. And this is a picture of a cake. The reason I show a cake here is because I think building motion graphics projects like this, especially when they're abstract, can be like making a cake. You've got all these ingredients, and you have a process you've got to follow, and at the end, you hand the client the cake. And they could easily turn around and go, well, we hate Oreos, or we said it needed to be gluten-free. And you throw the cake away. And I've been doing this for a long time, and I've thrown away a lot of cakes. So what we're trying to do is figure out ways in our the way we construct projects, that this doesn't happen. That we can be making stuff and building it with a lot of adaptability in it, so that if something massive changes, some sort of note that we didn't see coming, we don't necessarily have to throw everything away. And that leads us to Houdini, which is used on this project for just creating elements and animating them and then bringing them into C4D where we did all the rest of the work. The reason being is Houdini is procedural and it allows us to create objects and do a lot of work on them, but if something radical changes, there's a good chance that most of what you've done you can actually keep. You don't have to just start again. So if you're interested in kind of how we do this stuff, this is the surface object that I was just showing you, and it's actually a really simple thing. It's just a lot of points on a line. There are 100 points on this line. It gets copied loads and loads of times. I think that's 400 or 500 copies of this. And then we just add some geometry to this by sweeping a line down it and then extruding it. The problem is when you get to this point, you've got nearly 1 million points in here, and typically in any system that's going to get pretty slow. So one thing we try to do is work with something in a way that it's very manipulatable? Well, it's light. It's still got, in this case, this is just the points. There's no actual geometry in this scene, and I can move through this really quickly. This plays back in almost real time. I can iterate lots of different animation and make big decisions before I end up working with really heavy stuff and trying to do big, heavy renders. If you're interested in how this thing actually works, this uses a node inside Houdini called attribute from map. This stuff's really familiar to us from C4D because a lot of these sort of MoGraph tools that we use work in similar ways. In this case, basically we're just taking the luminance information from an image and mapping it onto the points in the shape. And then that gets stored into an attribute, which just means inside Houdini it's a detail that Houdini can read, or a number that Houdini can read. And then ultimately that's just used to push the points up in space. To build that Somatic Surface, which is the one behind the opera singer, we had lots of different shapes and we just blended them together. We were originally going to do this in After Effects, but in the end we just decided to do it inside Houdini. Once you get it inside C4D, and get it rendered in Arnold, it starts to look really cool. And you can see it's got a lot of detail in it, and this is something else I try to do on projects like this, is put the detail in, in the concept right away, so that you don't try to add detail later on. You're not trying to force it in comp. There's a lot going on in this. We could actually reduce the amount of detail if we wanted. But what I want to make sure is that I'm not creating an asset that I'm starting with that isn't going to have the kind of the amount of detail and intensity that I need when I get to comp. How does this thing animate? Well, basically it just takes the original flat one, which is the top left node there you see, and it takes 3 copies of it, and it's basically doing a morph. So if you look down at the bottom right, there's shape 1, shape 2, and shape 3. And we're using something called attribute transfer inside Houdini, which just means changing the color of the object will tell it which object to morph to. So you see it like this, where it's red, it becomes shape 1, green, it becomes shape 2, blue becomes shape 3. And you don't have to just do a kind of linear wipe like this. You can animate this attribute color any way you like. You can animate another object that weaves in there. It's a very powerful way of blending quite heavy geometries together very quickly and easily. We get this thing into C4D, and that's where we start texturing it. One thing I really wanted to do with this surface is make the color on it very dynamic. So it's always moving and it's always changing color. Did that in a couple of ways. First of all, this is all being rendered with Arnold in C4D. This is the diffuse color, so just the base color. It's using something called facing ratio, which is the same as Fresnel, if you know it from C4D. That's pumped into a ramp, which makes it either dark green or dark blue. And that just means that depending on the camera angle to this object, it's either dark green or dark blue. Where it gets a bit more fun is when you start working with the specular, the reflection channel, and we're using this thing called a thin film shader, which is pretty similar to an iridescence shader. And that gets pumped into the specular channel of my object using a couple of color correct nodes and a mix node here, which allows me to play with that and animate that over the course of the shot. And once you get it into, once you get it rendered out and get it comped, you see it's got lots and lots of different kind of subtle color variation in it, lots of detail. And of course we're relying a lot on the compositors to to pull these details out of these 32-bit images. Particles there, we've done an X particles. We added them on top. Speaking of compositing, we had a Nuke team on this, team led by a guy called Andre Bittencourt. They did an incredible job, and this is a slightly unusual step for us that we stepped out of motion design for the compositing, and we did that in Nuke. And these guys just did wonderful, wonderful work. To give you an idea, this is the second to last shot in the film. Pretty much these are the passes that are coming out of our renders. And you can see it's it's pretty dry. There's not a lot of atmosphere in that. Got all the stuff in there, but it's not really conveying what we're after. And this is what happens after the guys get a hold of it, and they just put lovely amounts of, actually it's this shot that I'm just showing you, all this kind of detail and fun and depth. Yeah, tremendously grateful for what those guys did on it. The sweeping circles at the end, we wanted some 3D kind of light sweeps, but we definitely didn't want to go down the kind of cheap 3D stroke or sweep NURBS option. So what we did, in fact, is artist Will Denning rendered just different camera angles of our geometry with lots of different lights sweeping over them at different speeds, and then just rendered it out with tons and tons of motion blur. And we just experimented with lots of different depths for this, lots of different speeds for this. And then our design director, Adam Perry, took these all into After Effects and just played with changing colors and layering them up. And yeah, you get this really kind of beautiful, very optical feeling light streaks that I think turned out looking really nice. That is it for my presentation. We are always looking for interesting people to come and work at the mill. The recruiting desk has been here for a couple of days, but actually it's not active today. But you're very welcome to speak to me after this, or go online, and we have a recruiting webpage. We have a very big talent department that is always looking for people across the board, not just in motion design, but every part of the mill. And I can say it's actually a really cool company to work for. So look us up. And of course, I'm very happy to take any questions now or afterwards. So thanks very much.